Welcome to the channel. Did you see that loaf of gluten-free bread? We haven't made a bread in a while, so today we're making gluten-free English muffin bread. It's sliced beautifully. It has a great crumb from what I can tell. Let me show you how I made it, and then we're gonna taste it because I've got this ready to go. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe, and let's make some bread. All right, so today's recipe, we need to talk about just a little bit, as we like to do here on the channel. I do like to give you guys some upfront information, as well as some things sometimes that I think may work and may not work. So let's go over that. I'm still drinking my coffee, and I am gonna put on an apron in a minute because I'm gonna end up with gluten-free flour all over me. It always happens. Okay, we are using King Arthur's gluten-free bread flour. The main ingredient in King Arthur's gluten-free bread flour is wheat starch. So this should be celiac safe. The gluten has been removed from the wheat, so it's leaving it with the starch. It is not wheat-free, so those of you with wheat allergies need to be aware of that. Also, some of you with celiac or gluten intolerances still may not be able to use this. Tara doesn't have any issues with this. I do like the wheat starch product, but always use your best judgment on ingredients. I found this at Target now. It's pretty widely available, but if you can't find it near you, I will link down below. And actually at Target today, it was the same price as it was on Amazon. The only difference was I used Ibotta and got $2.50 back per bag, and I bought a couple bags. All right, enough about the flour. The recipe comes from the King Arthur website, so I will link below to that recipe. The ingredients will be listed in the description, and I am baking by weight today. So drop it in the comments below. Are you guys bake by weight or bake by volume, or are you like me and I still go back and forth depending on the recipe? I am baking by weight, but King Arthur's really good about putting the volume equivalents on here, so don't worry about that if you are a bake by volume person. I am using the stand mixer for this recipe, but the instructions say you don't even need it. I'm just using it to do a little less work on the front end. I'm just gonna have to do the dishwashing on the other end of it. We are gonna use an 8.5 by 4-inch loaf pan. I have lightly greased this, and in true Jamie fashion, I picked up the flour this morning and didn't have any cornmeal. So the cornmeal should not affect the bake. It might affect releasing a little bit, but this is a greased pan and it's nonstick. So I think the big thing that it will change is it's not gonna have the cornmeal that your English muffins would have. So it's gonna be a little bit of just a textural change, slightly, should not affect the bake. You are also gonna need one of these. I'm gonna use it for one to measure the temperature of the milk, water, and melted butter, as well as the temperature of my bread. Bread bakes to a certain temperature, and you will get better results if you are using a thermometer. It does help with the bake, and I will say it does help, but I still don't always get the results I'm looking for because sometimes that starchy layer is down at the bottom. But big help in the kitchen. So we use it for chicken, we use it for beef, we use it when I'm baking gluten-free bread. Okay, that seemed like a lot of recipe notes today. Let's get started. So let's start with the pan. Again, this is 8.5 by 4.5. I've lightly greased it. I use shortening. Use whatever grease that you feel is best. And if you are using cornmeal, it does not give an amount. It just says to sprinkle some in, coat the sides of the pan, and tap out any additional that didn't stick. So I'm gonna put that to the side. In our bowl, I have 3 cups or 360 grams of the King Arthur gluten-free bread flour. I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of table salt, and it does say table salt, so don't use your coarse grains of salt. Use something fine like table salt or sea salt, or use the finer grade. I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. Finally, I've got a tablespoon or 9 grams of instant yeast. I'm gonna give it a whisk. Let's put this off to the side for a minute. Now let's work on our wet ingredients. I am going to use the microwave to do it. You could also use the stove. And the recipe says a small bowl or saucepan if you're doing it on the stove. I'm gonna use my measuring cup because it has a spout and I'm less likely to spill it. So I have added 1 1/4 cups of whole milk. which is 284 grams, to the measuring cup, along with 1/4 cup of water, or 57 grams. And I've also got 2 tablespoons, or 28 grams of unsalted butter. You're also gonna need a little butter to brush on the loaf before it goes in the oven. I would say about a tablespoon. We'll see what it ends up being when I get there. Instant yeast needs a temperature of about 120 degrees to 130 degrees. So I'm gonna heat up this liquid until it reaches somewhere in there. Try to aim for 120 to 125. Microwaves can be tricky, so this amount of liquid, I would start off with a minute, give it a good stir to distribute everything and balance out that temperature, and then take your reading. After that, sometimes I do 20 seconds, sometimes 10, sometimes I do 20 seconds and decrease the power. So just use your best judgment to get to that 120 to 130 range. Let's go ahead and get this heated and we'll keep moving forward. All right, so I'm at 123.3.1, somewhere in there. I've stirred it up. I'm still staying above 120 to still around 123. So we're gonna call that good. I'm gonna use the flat beater per the directions. If you're doing this by hand, you wanna pour the liquid over and just mix it briefly. I'm gonna pour in my liquid and then I'm gonna mix it briefly just until it's combined. Okay, it's all combined. I'm good with that. Now I'm gonna use 1 large egg. I did let it come to room temperature. And now I'm gonna add this. Now I'm gonna mix the egg in, and it says it should take about 1 minute with the stand mixer, or 2 to 3 minutes is what you wanna do if you're doing it by hand. It should resemble thick cake batter, and a few lumps are okay. All right, I'm just under a minute there, and I can see a couple lumps in here, not many. It does look like thick cake batter. I think we're good. Now I'm gonna transfer it into the pan. So I've got it combined down to the bottom of the bowl. It actually did pretty good with this, so I'm hoping transfer to the pan is gonna be just as easy. Almost one and done. Now it says to level and smooth as much as possible. King Arthur uses a blend of psyllium, and I think it has some xanthan gum in it too, pea protein. Those are some of the ingredients in there. So that psyllium husk is starting to gel up this bread, which is what I want. All right, I've got it pretty smooth, but I don't like that. I'm gonna wet my fingertips and try to smooth it a little bit more, and hopefully it smooths it out but doesn't mess any with the recipe. Let's see what that does. All right, damp fingertips. Let's do that one more time. All right. Wet my fingertips twice, smooth it out a little bit better. Now we have to let it rise. It's gonna rise for about 45 minutes to an hour. I like to put my dough in the oven to rise, so I set it for the lowest temperature. I let it preheat for a minute and then turned it off. So I'm gonna put it in there to rise. It may take about that time, maybe a little less. You want it to rise 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch above the pan. So I'm gonna cover it, and then I'm probably gonna check it maybe 20, 25 minutes in, because I don't want it to overproof. And I'm still gonna have to have time to preheat my oven. So if you are leaving this out, you wanna preheat the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, so allow time however you need for your oven to preheat for when this is ready. So let's get this rising. Okay, so it's been about an hour actually, not the 45 minutes. I took the bread out, preheated the oven, and it didn't look like it had risen enough, so I let it go longer out of the oven, just covered. It's supposed to be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch above the rim of the pan. I'm assuming they mean the middle and not the entire pan. Now I'm gonna brush it with melted butter and see how it bakes off. So I've got probably 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons of butter. You wanna gently brush the top of it. That's gonna help with browning. The dough feels solid on top, so I like that. It doesn't feel like it's a batter, and it has a lot of give to it, as far as I don't feel that the brush is gonna damage the top of the dough. That means that the psyllium husk, I would guess, is giving the dough some good structure, which is what its purpose is in gluten-free baking. Let's go over the baking instructions and get this baked off. We've covered it with a little bit of melted butter. Now we're gonna bake it for 23 to 29 minutes, which is very specific. You wanna make sure it's golden, and the recipe says that after about 20 minutes, it may look nice and golden, but it's probably not gonna be up to temperature. You wanna make sure your temperature is somewhere between 208 and 212 Fahrenheit. If this is too brown after about 20 minutes or so, it says you can cover it with foil. Once it's up to temperature, we're gonna leave it in the pan for 5 minutes before turning it out onto a cooling rack and letting it cool completely before we slice it. Let's get this baked off. I'm at 209.3, 209.5. I'm gonna call that good. I'm gonna let it cool in here for 5 minutes, take it from the pan, cool it down completely, and then we'll give it a taste. Nice and golden all the way around. Came out of the pan perfectly. No cornmeal. I'm okay with that so far. The bread's baked. It's been cut. Let's talk about it. So the top of it is nice and golden. It did bake longer than the recipe said in my oven. It baked for about 35 minutes, not the 29. I baked it until it was at the proper temperature according to the recipe. So for me, that's a good reason to have a thermometer, because if I'd taken it out at 29 minutes, not knowing what the internal temperature was, it may have not come out like it did. Rise. It's cooler in the house now. It's fall. I think it's about 67 in here right now, so it's a little cool. It's not cold enough where we want it warmer yet. So it didn't rise as fast as I would like, but it came out pretty good. It's not as big as a regular loaf, but it's consistent inside. I don't see the starch. Oh, you know what? I lied. I think there's one little bit of starch there, and it actually doesn't look bad. There's no ring of starch like I often find on the bottom of the breads I'm making. So I like the consistency of it. I like the texture of it. It squishes. I don't know what that's going to mean in 2 days, but it squishes right now. It's nice and consistent, and actually this piece looks better than the heel this piece looks better than the piece I just showed you. So I really like the consistency of the bread, even though it's not quite as big. Now, I did not have the cornmeal, so it looks like a loaf of bread and not like English muffin bread. It feels relatively dense, which I'm okay with. I feel like I can actually cut the pieces thinner if I need to. The directions were easy. The ingredients were easy. It does use the King Arthur gluten-free bread blend, so if you have a wheat allergy, you're probably gonna need to stay away from this. Always use your best judgment when you're preparing food for yourself. Let's try it. The heel as usual. So it is a little bit on the dense side, but so are English muffins. So I don't think it's a bad texture to the bread at all. I think it would do really well sopping up egg yolk, sauces, soups. I really like that aspect of it. Okay, let's do the butter half, which rarely do I say is bad because it's got butter on it. Okay, that's all I've got left. I like it. I think it's good. I like the denseness of it because it's not dense like a quick bread, but it's not light and airy like sandwich bread can be. So I do think this is gonna hold up well to some of those heavier things, like I said earlier, like sopping up soup or sauces and stuff like that. I actually think it would be really good cut into cubes and used for that Thanksgiving stuffing. So I like that thought of it. It's gonna make good croutons. Sandwich-wise, I do think it is thick. I do, for me, think it would be best for either some kind of open face sandwich that you want something hearty, maybe garlic bread. I know I keep looking back at the bread, sorry. That might be a good option for it. I don't know what you're gonna think about it with sandwiches, and if it is gonna be used for sandwiches, cut it a little thinner. That way there's less bread, because my piece was pretty thick. That's probably too thick for a sandwich. I would go thinner than that. Taste-wise, it's good. Tastes like bread. Texture is definitely a bread thing, like I said, more like English muffins, that it's denser anyway. I think Tara's gonna like it. I will try to leave that in the comments below, what she does think of it once she tries it. So, easy to make, easy ingredients. Didn't really have any problems with it, other than I didn't have cornmeal. Storage directions. The recipe says to store this tightly wrapped at room temperature for up to 3 days. For longer storage, slice and freeze for several months. If you go to the website and look at the recipe, down at the bottom of the recipe, there's also a section called Tips from Our Bakers. It does say that if you use a gluten-free sourdough starter, that you can actually use some of that in the recipe. Directions for that are down there as well. I'm thinking about delving into sourdough at some point, maybe. I haven't quite gotten myself around that scheduling wise. I'm trying to think about that a little bit. So if you guys want to see me go into sourdough, leave that in the comments below. I think if I do it, I will probably do something where I do a video every couple days on how the process goes. So I've never really dealt with sourdough much other than when I worked at the bakery, and that of course was sourdough that had gluten. So it's going to be new for me if I do it. So I'm thinking about doing that and seeing how the process would work. I'm also trying to be cost effective with it because obviously King Arthur's gluten-free flour is like $10 a bag. And sourdoughs have a lot of discards. So I'm trying to think about how I want to actually do a sourdough if I do. So we'll think about that. Back to this bread recipe. Good recipe. If you are using King Arthur's gluten-free bread flour, I would definitely give this a try. If you're using those other flours, cup for cup, some of the ones that we know are good for breads, maybe mess around with that and see if it works. If it does, leave that in the comments below. I cannot speak for other flours with this one because I've only done it with the King Arthur. Guys, that's enough rambling from me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave me any comments below. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.